Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Kubal. Today, I have a very special guest, Gregg Hale. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Oh, excellent, excellent. I always love when I get a team such as yourself, and people come to me and like, hey, we want to do this thing with you. I'm like, okay, cool. And I've just had such a uh, positive interaction with different teams such as yours, with just like I was saying, like I had people from the cast and directors and writers from Ren the Girl with the Mark on a couple weeks ago, and it's just been really great. So I've just been really blessed with the influx of people such as yourself, creators coming in and just trying new things or inviting me to be a part of the process. So I really appreciate you guys reaching out and want to come onto the show. So I'm really excited today to get to talk about your guys' products in particular and how you guys kind of manage things. So thank
Yeah,
you so
cool.
much for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us on. It's cool. I mean, I love kind of the cosmos of podcasts, especially in fantasy and sci-fi, because and horror too, because Ed and I do still do a
Yep.
lot of horror, but such great fandoms, right? Like people who are so passionate about things. And I think podcasts are a really, amazing grassroots area for fans to interact with people, like we were talking before we started recording about just the importance of community.
Yep.
So I think it's super cool that podcasts like yours give people a place to gather and kind of connect about things that they like. So it's super cool.
Yeah, and like we talked before we got recording, like I thought I was gonna do like 10 episodes and beg people beyond. I'm booked out for the next couple of years, which is like just such a great problem to have. But it also just like tell my wife, and she's really nice about it. Like today, took my son out and for a little bit longer. Usually, I try to do at least one a weekend. Hopefully, now that I have a different work schedule that starts in the fall, so I'm hoping to get more creators on, kind of during the week, and just to get more people. But I said her, I go season 5. I think 2 seasons now, I think I'm gonna have on like kind of like Agent M Gibson and MJ Kuhn do for SSF Addicts. Like I have like 3 or 4 people on at one time because there's just so many great people out there, and
Yeah.
products such as your guys is that you feel like you're not doing enough. For like I taking Father's Day weekend off, and I'm like, my wife goes, "You sure you don't want to do one?" I'm like, "I really do. I'd love to do 5." Just good to just spend time with the family and stuff, and it's also Father's Day weekend for other people too and stuff. But yeah, I feel like I talked to a couple of my friends, like Herman Stuart Engel. He does the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Nicholas Fuller is another one with his podcast. Like we feel like we're not doing enough, if that makes sense. So we try to get as many people on and and get as many eyes on your guys' products as possible. So
Yeah, cool.
feel really good about being able to help you guys out today with that. So I'm really excited just because at first when I got the email from you guys, I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. But then as I was like doing the research, I'm like, okay, this is even more interesting. So we'll start with that first question. Can you tell us about Emerald Anvil and why it is set up in the dangerous fairy realm of, is it pronounced Hada?
Hada.
Hada.
Yeah.
I knew it was mess
Or,
it up.
Otto. It's actually Spanish for fairy. I
That's
co-created the world with Eduardo Sanchez, which is my business partner for 27
oh wow.
years now. And we were working on so the reason we were doing a fairy thing is because my kid who just graduated from high school, when they were like 6, loved Tinkerbell. All Tinkerbell and all things Fae. And the Tinkerbell movies are actually the little standalone Tinkerbell movies are actually totally decent little movies,
Yeah.
which I've watched multiple times. But I was like, what would be a fairy-based world that I would enjoy as an adult fantasy reader? So it really kind of started there. And then I started doing little interactive things with my kid. Like I created a fairy character that wrote them letters and
Oh,
buried
that's
stuff buried stuff in the backyard and did little fairy photo shoots with them or whatever. So it started centering on the idea of a kid or kids, because we have 2 kids, um, with a tangible connection to to the fairy world. And I started pushing it a little bit toward the sci-fi angle in a sense, in that Hada is an actual planet, it's a physical place
oh, cool.
that you can teleport to. It's not like traditional, realm of the Fae where it's just magic and it just is, and magic explains everything, which is fine and great. But I wanted something that was a little more tangible and
Yep.
explainable. In our lore, there's actually reasons for why the fairies exist. They don't call themselves fairies, they call themselves Hadin, being from Hada. There's a reason why they interact. There's a reason why they bring humans to their planet. So really just wanted to kind of have a more tangible uh, explanation of why all this stuff happened. So fairies started with my kid, uh, tried to run it through the lens of what would an adult fantasy fan like. So Hada is really like way more, Game of Thrones than it is Tinkerbell. It's a very dangerous world. I mean, they're no more evil or good than humans. They have the same capacity for good and evil as we do. So the when the kids get teleported there in the first novel, um, they have allies who are nice and kind, and then there are enemies who are, totally evil and homicidal. Uh, so that's the basic world. And Ed and I have been making horror films together for a long, long time. Um, and we can get horror stuff done, but nobody's going to give me and Ed Sanchez $200 million to make a giant epic, fairy fantasy film. So we were really like, what would be a way that we could get this idea out in front of people, hopefully build an audience, and then go from
Yep.
there. And that's where we landed on the idea of doing Emerald Anvil as a multi-platform story world. So instead of just doing one novel or one podcast or whatever, we decided to connect everything and try to launch everything in a relatively short order. So we started with a podcast that actually the final episode of season one is going to play on. Well, I know this won't air until later, but on Tuesday, June 11th, that will be the 13th episode, final episode of season one of Black Velvet Fairies. That tells one story. We kickstarted a board game called Glim. That the Kickstarter, we just successfully funded the Kickstarter, so that's ongoing. The novel dropped a couple of weeks ago called Journey to Hada, and then we have an interactive storytelling game that we're not 100% sure when we're going to launch, because that's going to be based on how much of a community we can start building. But hopefully end of this year, very beginning of next, we'll launch this interactive storytelling game that's going to be based on Discord. And the cool thing about
Oh,
that,
that's cool.
it's called Battle for Hada. And the cool thing about Battle for Hada is we're going to invite people in. They're going to participate in this kind of a choose your own adventure, multifaceted choose your own adventure game that's going to be Discord based. And that's actually going to create canon story for the story world.
Oh, that's cool.
So people are actually going to participate in creating pieces of the canon story world, including building the map. We're reverse engineering the map of
That's awesome.
the Journey to Hada, which I just happen to have a copy here.
I love that cover, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah. The art's fantastic. Almost all the art is done by my friend Greg Rebus, who just did an incredible job with all the art. But um, in the novel, the kids get teleported to that world, and the lead character really is Morgan, is the older sister. She's 14, Morgan De Leon, and they're only aware of it's an entire planet, right? So there's 36 different kingdoms, they call them dominions, of fairy kingdoms or Hadin dominions on Hada. And the kids, because they're kids and they're teleported to this world and don't really understand it, they're only aware of four of the 36 kingdoms. So one of the things that we're doing with the interactive game is the map of the four main dominions is set, right? Because those are the crucial ones in the story. All the other 36, we're going to allow the fans or the users, the players, whatever term you want to use, they're actually going to build out the rest of the map. So depending on what dominion is popular and how they want to behave as that dominion is going to determine what the rest of the map looks like. So really trying to open it up to fan interactivity in a meaningful way. and really have it all be connected to canon story. And in success, if we keep going, we want to keep doing that and make it more and more interactive, if at all possible. So
Oh, that's super cool. Just like I got up, like I said previously today with R. Birdie, the author of the first binding, and him and I talked a lot about how to tell a story differently using craft, and even he does that with his main character Ari within the story. So I just find that serendipitous that here we are from the business side, I would say, and the craft side, where you guys have this really unique idea, of doing the same thing, a unique way of getting, fans involved in building a community. As a teacher, always trying to get students, to, have more of a say in their learning. I think that's just really cool. It's such a unique perspective. So that's really neat in itself. But the fact that, you guys are helping, having fans help to build the world too, just takes it to a whole new level. So that's just a really, really interesting idea, I think. And I think you're presenting different products in a different way too. I think is really cool. It really gets my mind working. And as somebody that wants, a D&D board game kind of thing, or at least book, for my own fantasy world, I love seeing people, as your guys selves, doing something unique like this. And it's interesting to see what kind of process you guys are using, what works and doesn't work. So, hopefully I can run a Kickstarter, to do something similar in the future. So it's so cool from multiple angles, as a creator and an author, to see what you guys are doing, and not just to tell your story, but to get the product out there. So I think that that's really, really neat and a really unique way of doing it.
yeah.
How did that kind of idea kind of come about?
Well, we when we made Blair Witch like 25 years ago now, this year's the 25th anniversary of Blair, which is kind of freaky. But when we made Blair Witch, so both Ed and I wanted to be filmmakers because of Star Wars. And really, most at least male filmmakers that I know, anywhere close to my age, will almost all say that they decided to be filmmakers because of Star Wars. But even when I was a kid, and same with Ed, and Ed's an even bigger Star Wars fan than I am, um, uh, neither of us looked at Star Wars as just a movie. I always thought of Star Wars as, oh, there's this world, but it's not just a movie, right? Because there were, even back in the day, there were, comic books
Oh, so good. Yep.
and action figures and all that kind of stuff. And I always just kind of looked at it as, oh, Star Wars, the movie is just one story
Yep.
in this universe. And that's just how I thought about it. And then when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons a couple of years later after I'd seen Star Wars. Um, if you start doing homebrews and making your own modules and stuff in Dungeons and Dragons, that introduces you to a completely new style of storytelling, right? Because
Yep.
really, Dungeons and Dragons is just interactive storytelling, right? You're doing the setting and you have stuff set out for them, but how they interact with it is up to
Yep.
the players, right? And that's what's fun about it. And actually, the way we wrote the novel, I'll digress here a little bit. The way we wrote the novel is so the lead character is written from the first person perspective of Morgan De Leon, like I said, a 14-year-old Cuban American girl. I've never been a 14-year-old Cuban American girl, but Ed's oldest kid, Bianca, was a 14-year-old Hispanic girl, Cuban American girl. And she's a very good writer, or they're a very good writer. So I reached out to Bianca, an illustrator, and I asked them if they'd be willing to basically play Morgan in a role
Oh,
playing.
cool.
So we got on a Google, they live in Maryland, and we got on a Google Doc together. And just like Dungeons and Dragons, I pre-wrote a bunch of stuff. I knew there were settings that they would go to. I knew there were characters that they would run into. I knew there'd be situations that, just like Dungeons and Dragons, right? You're going to push them into that, battle with the gnolls in the temple or whatever. They're going to get there. So I had some of that kind of stuff pre-written, but really I would just like get on the Google Doc and put a scenario in front of Morgan and in front of Bianca as Morgan. and they would react and I would react, and we wrote the first draft of the novel like a role-playing game, really. I mean, we weren't rolling dice or anything, but basically I was just following whatever decisions Bianca made as the character of Morgan. But anyway, I'm digressing from, so I think I've just always thought about stories as kind of multi-platform, right? Told in different places, but also a little flexible, right? Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons, you have to be flexible. And when we made Blair Witch Project, I'd like to say that we were like, oh, we're going to reinvent film marketing, but we really started with, okay, we've made this movie, or we've started to make the movie. We know the story of the movie, but we had all this backstory about the witch and other things that had happened leading up to it, and other things tangential to just the kids disappearing in the woods. So we're like, oh, well, how would we put that out in the world? And at the time, this would be 98. Coding a website in 1998 was a rare ability.
Yeah.
How anybody can build a website, but back in 1998, very few people could code HTML. You actually had to be
Yeah.
able to. And
Yeah.
and Ed could do it. He had learned from his cousins, had started a little business, and they had taught him how to build websites. So Ed just started building the website as not as marketing. I mean, we knew that there would be a marketing angle to it, but we really started the website as another storytelling thing, right? This is the way that we can tell a part of the story that we know we're not going to be able to tell in the film.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that it worked as marketing is because we weren't intending it to be marketing. Like people responded to it because, oh, this is just another piece of the story that they're putting in front of us. Um,
Mm.
and that ended up being, very successful. Luckily, incredibly fortunately successful with Blair Witch. And then we started a little business where we were doing story-based advertising for companies like Audi or Sharp or
Oh,
HBO
wow.
or whatever. Um, so as we've really just, always thought about stories as not a singular thing, so not singular, multiple platforms or multifaceted stories, and then just the whole idea of interactivity, right? Because one of the reasons that Blair Witch was successful is we built a really dedicated online community there at the beginning that really kind of helped push it out, right? And that was also our approach. The company that we started, which is still running, one of our partners, Mike Manello, is still running. It's called Campfire,
Mm.
um,
Oh,
and
yeah,
that
yeah.
story-based advertising,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
by and large. So it just kind of like that approach is just something that we've been doing for a long time. And when we thought of this fairy idea, like I said, nobody's going to give me and Ed $200 million to make the movie. So we're like, well, how could we get it out there? And really, we just kind of went back and forth on this idea for years. Like I said, my kid's 18, they just graduated. So this started when they were 6. So this has been over a decade. But a couple of years ago, Ed was just like, look, man, you can't stop thinking about this freaking fairy idea. So let's just treat it like a real project, right? Don't
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
let's like let's think about how we get it out in the world. So we really did it as like a grassroots, very indie approach where we raised a little bit of money. We got good friends of ours, Jane Fleming and Mark Rodesky. Mark was the executive producer of Lord of the Rings, and you know, presented it to them, made a big pitch deck and presented it to them, and they love the world. Get them involved, build a little business plan, raise a little bit of money, and then it was like, how do we execute we didn't really know what platforms we wanted to do at the very
Mm.
beginning. We knew there'd be a novel because you kind of got to have a novel. Um, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan. I'm a more of a board gamer now because I just don't, unfortunately, I don't have time to dedicate to
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Dragons campaign. So I'm mostly a board gamer now. So is Mark Rodesky. I mean, actually, how Mark and I met really became friends was because he's I mean, as you can imagine, the executive producer of the Lord of the Rings is
Yeah.
a giant Dungeons and Dragons fan. So we kind of like bonded, kind of became friends, like crossed from business stuff to being friends because of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, so me and Mark definitely wanted a game in there somehow. And I had not thought of a podcast, but Mike Manello, who, from Campfire, who also made Blair Witch with me and Ed, Mike had some really good success with a horror podcast that he had done and was connected at PRX through other work that he had done. He's like, well, could you figure out a way of doing a podcast uh, in this fairy world? And at first I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. Because I didn't want to do a just like read a book. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah, yep,
I didn't want to do like an audio book. I didn't want to do that. So at first I was like, I have no idea. And then Mike kind of kept pushing around. He's like, well, what if we went? He's like, since it starts in the world, in our world, right? Because it starts in a completely contemporary, modern setting in the United States, in Portland, Oregon, which is where I live. Um, he's like, is there a way that you could kind of root the fairy story in our reality? And then that kind of light bulb in my head went off of like a Blair Witchy kind of thing of, is it real? So, I know that you've listened to a little bit of the podcast.
yep,
The podcast is presented like it's a real person. Their grandmother dies. The grandmother leaves them these four black velvet paintings of fairies. Weird stuff starts happening. They start exploring what's my family's connection to these fairies, blah, blah, blah. And not that we expect anybody to necessarily believe that it's real, but we're presenting it, as if it's real. Like all the experts on there. I know that you said you were on like season two, or I mean episode 2 or episode 3, where the experts start showing up.
yep.
All those experts are real. Like
Oh,
the
that's
fairy expert, like John Cruz, really has written like a dozen books on fairies.
oh wow.
Um, we do an EVP thing. That guy, Greg Newkirk, has got a really successful podcast and ghost hunter TV show. Like he's a real ghost hunter.
Oh wow.
Later on, the Brian Dunning from Skeptoid comes on
Oh,
as
that's cool.
as a guest.
Oh, that's
And so they're real experts, but they're playing along
oh, that's cool.
in our fictional world, right? So since we kind of came up with this like, is it real approach with the podcast, it's like, oh man, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the fourth platform, we didn't. It's not like we sat out to do 4 platforms. I think initially we were thinking we would do 3. But then we've just technologically, between Discord and NFTs, we thought that there was like the thing that I like about NFTs. I know that NFTs like are ridiculous in a lot of ways, but there's some really cool things about NFTs as a technology,
Yeah, yeah.
as a storyteller, because it's kind of got like this persistent digital reality, where it can sit out there and exist forever and be traded like a trading card or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
but still be tangibly connected to whatever it is that you want to connect it to. So that's what we're doing with Battle for Hada, the interactive storytelling game. Is have you ever played Risk?
Yep. Oh yeah, I love Risk. Yeah.
Sure you have. So imagine Risk, but instead of 42 countries, we've taken a map of the fairy world, the map of Hada, and divided it into 10,000 hexes. So basically, and then each hex is a uniquely generated 3D model of that part of the world with attributes that give it. Glim is the power that the fairies use in this universe. Um, each little hex has its own amount of glim, and then you're going to use that glim to vote in the interactive storytelling.
Oh, that's cool.
That's all, and like the digital, basis of that is going to be an NFT, right? Because that's something that can live forever. You can change
Yeah.
it, but still have this tangible thing that somebody can own in the digital world.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So then once we realized that we had that capability, I thought that was super exciting.
Yeah.
I tried to not think about the dumb shit of like people paying $1 million for a digital monkey face or whatever. But I really do think it's going to be a cool a cool thing for fans, right? Because
Yeah.
we're gonna give away the first 1,000 pieces is going to be a giveaway.
Oh, that's
And we're
awesome.
really hoping that we give those to fantasy fans. Like we not nothing against people who come at it from the NFT first, but we don't want to start with the NFT first. We want to start with people who want to be involved in a fantasy world
Yeah. Yep.
and give them a way to do that. So I'm super excited about that. And technologically, that's all going really well, but we just have to build a little bit of community to make sure that we get 1,000 people who really want to
Yeah.
be involved. Yeah.
Yep. No, that's super cool. It's funny that you mentioned the just like with the book, like doing it that way, because like of my own fantasy world, I was like, oh, I have things that I think are really cool, and I was like, I want to test them out on an audience before writing a bunch of stuff. Spending a lot of time writing and stuff, and then I like ran a campaign 2 summers ago before my son was born for my friends, all about my world and one section of it, and but there were certain things world building wise that I wanted to test out. And I was like, I think they're cool, but I just wanted to make sure. And it was so funny because there were so many times where I had everything set up and then I would go and I would give it to the players. And then I was always having to take notes during the sessions because I always had a better idea than if that makes sense. And they really helped to drive. It was a great exercise to help to drive world building for me, and some characters. I had some characters that are going to pop up in different books and stuff as primary, secondary characters. So it was really cool to see how they would interact. And there were so many times where they just did stupid stuff. And I was like, oh, that was a better story though. So I ended up changing things in
Oh,
actual books, if
yeah,
that
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah. It was
yeah,
so
yeah,
I totally get the interactive piece.
yeah,
I
yeah,
always tell people like if you're getting stuck, do a one shot campaign with the scene or characters or
yeah,
whatever, and just let it's natural cultural diffusion, right? So I think that
yeah.
makes total sense. So
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, the thing that I always loved about Dungeons and Dragons, even when I was a kid, was like how surprising it was as a story because you never know what the
yeah,
other five or six or seven people are going to do. And it was the
yeah,
same thing with me and Bianca doing Journey to Hada. They're 22 now, but they definitely remember being 14 better than I do.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So they were so much better at like doing dumb shit that a 14-year-old would do, like things that I might not have, almost for sure wouldn't have thought of.
yep,
Where Bianca would surprise me by doing something that would like feels really stupid because they remember what it's like to be 14 and you're not making decisions like an adult.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so a lot of the coolest things in the book, no spoiler alert, but like, as an adult, like I'm thinking, um, oh, what would be the best tactical way to do this, and how would you escape from this situation or whatever? And and Bianca would be like, I kick the guard and run, which is like a Dungeons and Dragons thing. Like as a dungeon
Yeah,
master, you'd be like, are you sure that's what you want to do?
yeah,
And so like in the storytelling realm, it was the same thing. It's like, all right, I guess you can try. It's not gonna go well. I mean, it's
yep,
like three guards who are in armor standing there, and you're gonna kick one of them in the shin and try to run, and you're a 14-year-old girl who weighs like, 120 pounds. Like, I'm not sure how this is gonna go,
yeah.
but stuff like that was like was really fun and made I think made the novel a lot more interesting than it would have been if I had just done it
Oh,
by
for
myself.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have a dark fantasy. I call it my fantasy. I just need something that's just a little different off my palette cleanser in between some urban fantasy stuff I'm doing, and it's all off of an old campaign we did, like a dark fantasy campaign, and I literally was like showed it to a friend who wasn't part of the campaign. He goes, "This is hilarious." He goes, "Why are these two characters like this?" I go, "That's me and my friend Dan." I go, "We just did dumb stuff and it end up just making the story like at one point we tried to steal something from like a wizard's tower and it was like a sorceress and I was trying to distract her like we were on a date and he was trying to steal stuff and he didn't check the traps because he wasn't thinking about it and then the next thing you know one of the traps goes off and then she's chasing us with fire bolts and stuff. So I put that into the book as like how you met the two main characters, and then there were some other people that I had from other campaigns and stuff, but it was all player generated. So
Yeah,
I
yeah, that's
totally
cool.
agree. It just makes a better story. So
Yeah, 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 for
that's
sure.
super cool. But I think that's what's cool about you guys, doing the world building that way too, where whoever's, I like that, thinking of like which regions or kingdoms are more popular, and those would have more power within the society or the world building. I think that, and get more resources, right? Because then that changes your entire landscape of the world building. I think that's really cool to invite people in to take part in that. So I think you'll get a even more unique story there with more people. I think you get
Yeah,
a more unique story. So
yeah,
that's really cool.
yeah. I'm kind of interested. I mean, basically, like the super simplistic breakdown is, are you anti-human or human, right? Or
Yeah, yeah,
pro-human or neutral? But really, it's like, are you anti-human or pro-human? If you're a fairy, do I like humans? Do I hate humans? So I'll be kind of interested when we open it up, like which dominions people are drawn to, right? Like, because
yeah,
I
yeah,
got a feeling, because usually, like when I was a kid, I like Darth Vader. Like he's the coolest character, right? He's the
yeah,
bad guy, but I didn't
yeah,
care. He's cool. He looks cool. And I think that's generally speaking, that's kind of the way it is in a lot of, in a lot of settings, in a lot of story worlds. So I got a feeling that people are going to gravitate toward the anti-human, because they're a little more fun because they're a little more fucked up.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's fair. I think that's why, like, I haven't started the acolyte yet, but I'm really excited because I just think the way that they have approached some of the bad guys recently, just that's why I can't wait to get back to Ashoka. Oh, with the two Sith in there. I'm totally blanking on the guy's name, but I loved him in like King Arthur and all those movies. Unfortunately, passed away, right? But I think they just did such a good job of portraying lately the bad guys. They are a little bit more fun than Darth Vader going through and choking everybody and doing everything, particularly, when they added that Rogue One scene, was just amazing. So I think it really like made the movie as, bringing his
Oh yeah.
classic character. And that's like Boba Fett too, right? Boba Fett was supposed to be a one-off, and people loved him, so they brought him back. And then talk about how fans shape a fandom, right? Then he gets out of the Sarlacc pit, and then
Yeah.
is a character again and does amazing things in the books, comics, and
Yeah, yeah.
and
Although
the TV
I
show.
hated the show. I hated the show. I really hated
They
it.
had so much potential, and they just like the greatest part I think is that they just brought Mando, but I was like, why didn't we just do season 4 or 5, whatever,
Yeah,
sooner
yeah.
or something? Yeah,
I really hated the
was
Boba Fett.
a shame, shame, shame.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just so funny
Don't
because
don't don't get me don't get me started on Boba Fett.
well, my friend's like one of the best characters. You know what I liked about that show was the other Wookiee that they had. I thought he was honestly like one of the coolest characters, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but like that's my friend. He's like, how could you watch this and that? I'm like, it's Star Wars. I said I didn't say it was my favorite,
Yeah.
but I said, but there's different things and characters. I liked you know, why am I'm just blanking on names this week. You can tell I'm going to find out. Lucy Chen, right? Her character, I absolutely
Yeah.
loved. I thought she stole the show, and she's like definitely one of my favorites from like the Disney universe and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But that's I try to tell people, I'm like, I'm like, there are different people that I've enjoyed, in different shows and stuff, even if I didn't quite, enjoy the show or the movie,
yeah.
itself or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, it had some cool people in there. Poe Dameron, I think, is a really cool one too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, cool. We did talk about quite a bit. But in terms of kind of, moving towards, the products themselves. So I guess I'm kind of curious when it came. So the podcast I really enjoy. I just want to talk about that real quick. Because I love podcasts. I really liked it, and I can't wait to finish it this week. I'm excited for the last episode of season 1 to be out. I really liked the approach. I was kind of thinking it was going to be more of like a story based thing, but I like how it's like kind of like a diary, and bringing in different characters, and I just like the format so much because it reminds me of like another horror podcast I love, the Magnus Archives, and that was told in a similar fashion at the start and end of each episode. And I love different craft and how people tell stories. So I just got to say, I really liked just like how the podcast was set up just in general. But it's even cooler knowing, you guys had different guests from those actual, like fields that they're in. So that to me is going to make it even better. But I really like that format. I thought that was really cool. So I just wanted to point that out because I think people should really definitely check out the podcast. Because I'm a book person, but I love podcasts too. And I love podcasts because of, like how people tell stories. So I thought that was just brilliantly done because I think
Oh,
it
cool. Thank you.
great job. But I was wondering though, like I had to listen to it because I was, going through you guys' press kit and I was like, okay, like I get it, but I'm like, I have to listen to it so that I can figure out how it fits for the human aspect. And I gotta say, I loved once I understood like that it was this story here and it was like the other side of the coin, if that makes sense. To like, some parts of the book and stuff. So to me, that just made it really, really cool. You guys gave it multiple outlets. But what I was just kind of curious at what was that driving force to decide that you were going to split it to like the human side and Earth side, and then going to Hada as well. So I'm just kind of curious at how that kind of came about story wise.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of started with like go back to, interacting with my oldest kid when they were 6 years old and like wanting it to be like this tangible thing, right? Because really the Fae, British Isles fairies, which is what most of us think of as fairies.
Yeah.
And almost every culture in the world has a fairy type
Yep.
creature, of lore, like
Yeah.
some sort of tiny creature that's from
Yeah.
some other place that, is, sometimes good, but sometimes bad. I mean, really, when you dig into British Isles fairies, like the Fae stuff that we grow up with, like our expert on Black Velvet Fairies on the podcast, John Cruz, is like the vast majority of the time interacting with the fairies is not good.
Yeah.
But fairies are either mischievous at best or are out to just fuck you up
Yeah.
at at worst. So it's like most of the time you didn't want to interact with the fairies because it didn't go well for the human, right? Um, so I kind of wanted ours to be tangible, that there's some sort of like physical connection between the two worlds. Um, so really like how the world was constructed was kind of based on that initial inspiration of how I wanted it to be for my kids, right? And then from there, I kind of just got into the idea of this happening, there being interaction between this fairy world and our world for thousands of years, right?
Mm.
And if you have a tangible world where the fairies can bring you to their world, and maybe sometimes people don't come back, if that's happening for a planet of fairies over thousands of years, you're eventually going to have lots of humans living on this fairy
Right.
world, right? So in our lore, in our story universe, like 150 years ago, um, if there are 2 billion Hadin on this planet of fairies, there were like 40 million humans
Oh wow.
that that lived on this world, the vast majority of which had never been to Earth,
Mm.
right? Because they could be generations away from somebody who had ever
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
Earth. Um, so, and then story wise, no big surprise, some terrible thing happens 150 years ago that a human caused, right? So on our world, you've had thousands of years of interaction with between Hada and Earth. So the fairies have kind of built, most of their religions are built around interacting with humans, right? Because their planet is kind of set up to interact with ours. There's got to be a reason for this. There's got to be a reason for why we can connect with these humans and bring them here. What does it mean, right? That's kind of like that's their major religious question, right? It's like, why are we interacting with humans?
Mm.
So for some of them, there's all different variations. For some of them, humans are like the pathway to nirvana, like you can only reach heaven or their version of paradise, or uh, see their religion through in a positive way if you interact with humans in a positive way. But for others, a much smaller number, 150 years ago, humans were like demons, like basically these portals that they use to interact with Earth. These little religions looked at it as like the forbidden fruit, right? You're not supposed to use the portals. The gods put the portals in front of us as a temptation, but we're not supposed to use them, right? Because if we use them, we're bringing evil into our world. We're bringing humans are evil. So when this terrible things, and I don't want to get into what it is, spoiler alert, too much, but a human does a terrible, terrible thing about 150 years ago, destroys almost a third of the planet. So what used to be little sects, little cults that were anti-human were like, ah, see, we told you.
Yeah.
So what started out as like a little cult 150 years ago, now when the kids get teleported to the world, they're the empire, right?
Mm.
They've become the most powerful military force on the planet because their religion seems to be right. Like we need to kill all the humans. So they've basically been trying to wipe the humans off this planet for about 100 years. And then there's a big peace treaty. Then the kids showing up, they're the first humans that have been teleported to Hada in about 150 years. When the kids show up, that kicks off different prophecies for different religions, right? But for the main big, the Holy Empire, their thing is now it's time to wipe out the rest of the humans. So
Mm.
when the kids show up, it kicks off this genocidal holy war, basically, that the kids are in the middle of and have no idea what's going on. And of course, look, it's fantasy 101. I'm not reinventing anything. The kids obviously have powers on Hada that nobody else has, bleep, blop, bloop. They're the key to figuring it out, right? It's just
Oh,
that
cool.
now you're starting on this journey of how does this 14-year-old kid and their 11-year-old brother, what the hell are they going to do to navigate, a global, worldwide genocidal war? How are they going to navigate that? So that's really what we set up in the first novel. And I think I completely diverged from whatever the hell you asked
Oh
me.
no, it was no, it's no. I think that sounds awesome. That's really cool. But I think that trying to think without yeah, I just think that's really cool though, going from like Lucy's perspective to their perspective to
Yeah,
then just like the other two products getting, more of that world building perspective. So I just think it's cool that you guys opened up world building into like four different pockets, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Or, because if you get somebody coming in like myself from the podcast, that was interesting, but the book sounds really interesting too. So I get two different points, of entry into the world. So my overall questions, I think, really were today were just over like the story process, but also how you guys, did that. So I think that to me made a lot of sense. And I think that, going back to the Star Wars reference, I actually really enjoyed the movies, but it was really for me the comics that really did it, that were after the movies. And then I got into the books because of the comics. And then, they had all those great video games for the 90s.
yeah,
So I don't know. I
yeah,
just I totally understood why you guys did what you did.
yeah.
Because I think it makes total sense to get somebody into a fandom, and Dune is another one. Now they got like Dune comics because of the new movie, and I picked up like a issue 3 the other day or something, and I got in because of the the original movie, and then the sci-fi one from like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I really enjoyed part one, but I haven't even read the book yet. It's on my book club, but it's
Oh,
interesting. I think
wow.
you guys, but I got the comic and I was like, well, I know I'm gonna like it because I like the the other mediums and stuff. So I just think, and I used to play like a kind of like a strategy game for Dune as well, where you're like harvesting the spices and stuff. And I think it was like early 2000s. So I think it's cool to where you guys understood that people were coming in from different mediums into the same world, and we could attract them in different ways. So I think that's just like really smart, and I think it's a good thing for people to think on, particularly with Kickstarter today. Because maybe somebody maybe they want to do like a graphic novel, but they also want to do a novel, but maybe they take two different characters and or two different groups of people, right? Like the humans and the fairies, and go from two different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that that's just a really, really, really cool idea. And a different way of storytelling. Really, that's really neat. So,
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you. Yeah, and speaking of board games and Dune, I right now, me and the guys that I play board games with, we're mostly obsessed with Dune Imperium,
mm.
which is a board game, which is, I think, maybe the best board game derived from a
Okay.
from a story ever.
Oh,
It's
awesome.
really, really. If you like the new movie, I would definitely try Dune Imperium.
All right, I'm gonna write that down.
Really, really good game. Yeah, yeah,
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think again, going through different mediums too. I look at Warhammer, and I like more of the fantasy rather than the 40K. I still like the 40K, but I liked like the fantasy. My friend was like, "Oh, do you want to play?" And I'm like, "I played 40K and stuff." I'm like, "It's good and all," but he goes, "No, I want to play like the fantasy. Instead of doing D&D, he goes, let's take a break and do this." And I'm like, oh, okay. And then we set it up, and unfortunately, he had to move as our DM for that. But I want to definitely go back and play that. But I don't. It's just cool because like people are like, oh, Henry Cavill's doing this, and there's so many different points of entry to enter the world, and I
yeah.
have different video games and board games and comics and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I just want to say like they built their entire success off of doing multiple media platforms, and I think Magic the Gathering's another one, right? Went from cards to to board games to to books and stuff, and there've been and comics. I like their comics from the early 2000s run. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I just think it was smart that you guys looked at that and were like, how can we get generate a community, and get these types of products to all be within the same world. So I think that that was really really smart. But
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Dune Imperium, I'm gonna have to
Yeah,
check out Dune
hopefully
Imperium now.
we just find that audience. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
there's so much stuff out there now, right? There's so much things that people have to choose from. And like I said, this is all indie grassroots, raise a little bit of money, angel investment. But if you don't have a big giant marketing budget, it's
yeah.
you got to do this, right? You got to get on
Yep.
podcasts and like talk to people and do it really kind of almost like one fan at a time, right? Like just give me one fan and I'll start from there, right? So
It's so
so
funny that you mentioned that because so many people that I talk to, creators and authors, they want to be like the next TikTok sensation. And I'm like, there's just not that many people, it's a small percentage of people. And I tell people, I go, I came into this as like an indie author and creator, like knowing like I had a graphic novel I was prepping with a guy and then locally, and then I wanted to do like a Diablo style thing where like a town gets overrun based off of like I have this thief and he just can't help but being a thief, right? And he goes and steals a local thing, and then it sets off a chain of events that attacks the town. He's got to go with his two veteran buddies, and they have to go down a blacksmith slash warrior sorceress healer, and they have to go and like save some of the town's children and then like stop this thing. And it was going to be a graphic novel, and then the pandemic happened, and maybe I'll go back to it, but I turned it into a novel. So it's just cool to see you guys do this because I'm like, oh, I still would love to do that graphic novel. I was originally trying to be an illustrator and stuff back in the day. I
yeah,
love art. So I don't know. I love seeing projects like your guys' be successful because I would love to do, something similar. And I'm such a gamer, board game wise and stuff, that even if we just did, like a PDF manual or something like that on
yeah,
Kickstarter, made it hardcover. I don't know. I'd feel successful if that makes sense because I have different creative realms, not just being author. That I
yeah,
want to be
yeah,
able to
yeah,
I did one thing in each thing, or did these three things, and life goals kind of thing. So I don't know. It's just cool to see you guys, do that. So I really hope that each of the campaigns and overall everything's really successful. But it sounds like a really cool world. I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm anxious to get more into the book personally, just because that's one of the mediums I really enjoy. But yeah, I'm really interested to finish up the podcast and then kind of see from the overall lens kind of where you guys are going with stuff. But
yeah.
I'm kind of curious. I know we kind of went all over the questions, but that's fine. I'm just kind of curious that like what's been your favorite part about working on this project so far? Like if you had to pick like one thing or
Uh,
two things even.
yeah. I mean, I mean, because the podcast, so my friend Jamie Nash really is the main writer on the podcast, and Jamie's a screenwriter. He's either written or co-written almost everything that me and Ed have done since Blair Witch. And so when we came up with the podcast, I knew that I needed somebody who was like really going to get in there and like knock it out. And Jamie had been wanting to do a podcast, so I turned the podcast over to Jamie, came up with a story with him together, and then turned it over to him. But with the board game, when you're saying what's your favorite piece, uh, I mean, look, because I'm a gamer and I've never made a game before, I was like
Yeah.
super excited about the game. And then I lucked out and found there's a lot of gaming stuff in Portland. I live in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I hooked up with Together Studios, which is Jen Ellis and Keith Baker. And Keith's actually like a Dungeon and Dragons rock star.
Cool.
He created the Eberron
I
setting.
love that setting.
Yeah, so he created that setting. So him and Jen both just know this kind of fantasy stuff inside and out. And then that's all they do is design games. So when I talked them into getting involved, I was so excited. And they just took it and ran with it and came to me with a bunch of ideas for how to translate the world into a board game. And like I said, I've never done a board game before. Oh, the reason I brought up a podcast is like the podcast, I've never done a podcast before, but it's a little bit like making a movie, except you're not shooting it, right? But you're
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
the script is kind of formatted the same way. You're hiring actors, you're performing the scenes, you're editing it together. So in a lot of ways, I mean, it's an audio version, but it's a lot like making a film. So the process didn't feel that exciting to me necessarily, because I make movies and TV shows and stuff. But a board game, I'd never done a board game. I'm like, how do you go? What's the creative process, right, of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
developing a game? So, and Keith and Jen definitely led the charge. I was just kind of like providing the story, but working with them to do the game and watching the game come together. And we play tested the game, dozens of times to get it to the point to be ready to kickstart. That as a gamer, I really enjoyed because that was really learning about a new way of telling a story. Because really, even board games, especially modern board games, like Scythe or Gloomhaven or anything like that, it's super story based, right? And really, all games are to some degree, right? You're kind of telling a story in your head. Even, I mean, I guess sorry, maybe not, but Candyland, right? That's
Yeah.
definitely a story, a simple
Yep.
story, but definitely a story. I know when I was a kid and I was playing Candyland, I was imagining, Trump through the fudge swamp or whatever. So to answer your question, I think the thing that I enjoyed the most was doing the board game, and the board game turned out really great. It's beautiful art. It's a really cool mechanic. If people, so the way to check out all this stuff is emeraldanvil.com, and we've got links to everything from emeraldanvil.com. Uh, the Kickstarter is done, but we're using backer kit. So once we have it set up, you'll be able to come in and and order the game, even though the Kickstarter is over because we're
Oh,
using backer.
cool.
But you can go on our Kickstarter page is still live, and we've got world lore on there, but we've also got some playthrough videos that me and Jen and Keith did. Um, and we also took you can see when you go to the site to the Kickstarter, we took a is it real approach with the board game. Where the board game is supposed to be the story behind the board game is this is a game that the fairies played on Hada that humans brought to Earth and have kind of changed, and this
Oh,
is
that's cool.
a version of it. So, but yeah, you can check all that stuff out. And I think for like gamer geeks, it's a really cool. It's a very simple game, but with a simple mechanics, but with a really deep strategy. So once you learn how to play the game, you can sit down and play a whole game in like 45 minutes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of simple, but with a lot of story and really beautiful art. I mean, I can say all this because I was mostly just kind of like providing story world stuff for this. But Jen and Keith did an amazing job on the game mechanics, and then they got really amazing artist named Ren Lindroos to do the art, and so it's a really beautiful, cool little game. So very, very excited about the game.
No, that's awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, Greg, for coming on today.
Yeah,
This has been awesome. I learned so many different things and got me thinking about quite a few things myself, product wise. I just want to remind everybody from our audience that you can find the Emerald Anvil link in the description. You can find actually also all the other products as well. So if you're new, just make sure you go there. We want to just remind people too, and I just think it's a great day, Greg, to remind people of this. there are so many different creators and products and people that go into each thing. So please make sure you guys are liking, sharing, subscribing, and make sure you're reviewing any product, because it just helps the overall community. There's so many people that went into this project, so we want to make sure they're getting their due, their credit, and get more work in the future to give us cool stuff like this.
Yeah,
But
cool.
yeah, Gregg, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing where this goes, and having you guys on in the future to see what worked, what didn't work, what you guys learned, stuff like that. So anytime you guys want to chat, just let me know and we'll get you back on. Send me anything you guys got and I'll keep sharing it. I'm looking forward to the board game myself, so I'm glad to know that they you can get a copy of it still. So that's super cool. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the day, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one, Gregg. I'll see you later.
All right, see you.
Bye.